Hey everyone, Happy New Year. I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the state of our market, aka market update. You know, it's several years going into the pandemic, you would have to, as an agent, kind of proactively pursue a dialogue with anybody about the market condition coming from the Great Recession of 2007 and 9 era. And then since the pandemic up to present, now everybody's, everywhere I go is asking, what's the market like, what's real estate? And there's a lot of unknown, and quite frankly, the real estate environment, like anything today, just changes very fast. Probably you could argue it changed 4 to 5 times from the onset of the pandemic until today. So the 3 talking points that I just kind of wanted to identify for us locally, because market environments are very, very local in nature. So what I'm going to talk about maybe isn't applicable to every environment throughout the region in the country, and even I would say within even one state. But the 3 things that I'm going to talk about are inventory, pricing, and then the infamous interest rates. So the first one that I want to talk about is inventory, because inventory is data, right? So data tells us in the onset, in the frenzy, I shouldn't say onset, the frenzy of COVID, our local inventory shrunk down to about a 7 to a 15-day window. And what that means is inventory is gauged, is measured by if everything that's on the market as we speak was to sell at the pace of transactions, that's how many days it would take to absorb that inventory. So 7 to 15 days. Hence the reason why anything that hit the market was under contract in hours, at the latest a couple days. So we've grown from that 7 to 15 day inventory to a current 2.5 month of inventory. So quadrupled. So you could look at that as our inventory is quadrupled in size. However, the neutral measurement is 6 months. So 2.5 months of inventory is still grossly low compared to a 6 month of inventory, which is defined as neutral. And what does neutral mean? Well, neither a buyer nor a seller's market. So by definition, at 2.5 months of inventory, we're still technically in a seller's market, though some people's sentiment might tell you something different. And so then, parlay that into pricing. Where's pricing? Well, look, the last 24 months we've seen over 40% of appreciation, much greater than that in some segments, i.e. waterfront specifically. And, when everybody talks about what goes up must come down, that's not really true for us. We were grossly undervalued going into COVID. So we certainly locally saw a much larger increase in pricing, but that was driven by probably too low of pricing pre-COVID to then incorporate the frenzy in it, and you get the result that we got. That's not sustainable. That's not going to continue to happen. This would be the one projection, I suppose. The data is telling us we'll probably see somewhere between 3 and 7% appreciation, which is healthy. That's still good, but it's not negative. So our pricing is not retreating. Price adjustments, that the chatter that you hear and may even see is examples of where maybe the seller shot for the moon on the price and they didn't get it, whether they timed it wrong, whatever. But with the inventory starting to increase a little bit, interest rates, reducing the buying power for a finance buyer. So, and if that seller is still eager to sell, then they're going to make price adjustment. That's just a normal process in that. So with regards to pricing, we're not going to retreat. We're just not going to see that level of appreciation. But that's the cyclical thing when people talk about cycles. And then the third one being the interest rate. So, we were so low for so long at 3%. Everybody kept telling you as a buyer, if you were financing, these rates aren't going to be here forever. But they just seem to continue just to be here forever, and then boom, all of a sudden, now over a period of 12 months, they've literally more than doubled, which is historical in its own right. So we've gone from grossly too low to now arguably too high, too fast. Inflation will get in check probably somewheres by third quarter of 23. And then we'll either see a stabilization, if not possibly maybe a small pullback. We did top at just over 7%. As of this morning, it's hovering around 6.3, so we're already down a little bit. But you know, everyone's talking about they're just going to sit back and wait and possibly watch prices come down. The thing that you have to fundamentally understand is this is very different 2007 and 2009 to where we are now, and very different being very simple actually. We were in a very under-regulated environment where loans were being granted, you know, as they say, fog and a mirror, to then coming post-2009 all the way to 2017. It was so strict to borrow money to purchase a home, and we saw such small appreciation, again speaking locally, that you just were kind of neutral in that. And so primary residences were acquired, and then the interest rates started dropping and refinancing or selling and upsizing in your house, whatever that was. And then you look at 2007 came, you know, flipped a switch, and you couldn't afford with Great Recession to buy and sometimes even keep your home. Where today it's 180. It's almost like you can't afford to sell. And you say, well, what do you mean you can't afford to sell? Well, again, if you're locked in at a 3 to a 4% interest rate and you have massive appreciation, whether you've owned the home 24 months or greater, versus what the interest rates are currently, you know, that limits every $100,000 that you were to borrow, you know, that's a couple $100. So you start talking at our average median house price selling here locally is north of 500,000. That's a big swing in buying power, no matter what's standing the purchase and acquisition price of what you're relinquishing versus what you're selling. So you relinquish your home that you have great appreciation, but you're going to give it all back into the same replacement property that too has appreciation, and then at a much higher interest rate. So again, under regulations to over regulations, and many people are just kind of stuck in their home in a good sense, and that's going to continue to keep our inventory very low, as people just aren't going to want to let that property go. And then you combine that into waterfront home ownership is at its longest tenure since they've been keeping track, meaning that those who have acquired waterfront, direct waterfront, be that Bay, Gulf, Intercoastal, they're holding that property longer. It's an in use, whether it's their primary or secondary home, and it's just not coming back to market, being available again. So when we see things that do come to market, those properties are still selling within days and weeks, especially if it's a desirable property. So then wrapping this all up, you know, being in the first part of January of 2023, what my expectations are is, you know, many sellers, if they were contemplating putting a property on the market, say really Halloween, Thanksgiving-ish time through the end of the year, many of them would table that just to get through the holidays, especially if it's their primary residence. We also see demand start to kind of fall off around the holiday time. But now we're into January. My expectations is, like usual, we will see some new inventory come to market. I think the environment's conducive to having a willing and able seller to price it accordingly. And then cyclically, again, January through April, us locally will see the snowbirds, second homeowners, vacationers come, and demand, I think, now that rates somewhat stabled and we're through the holiday, and I think inflation will continue to result being in check and being reduced, that, you know, demand will sustain the inventory coming to market and will be absorbed. And I just don't anticipate a flood of inventory or a gross decline in our local housing pricing.